Hi, I'm Mohammed Mars, and welcome to our look at what might just be the real First World War. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Mohammed, wasn't that the one from 1914 with the trenches and the archdukes? And to that I say yes, but also no. Long before the 20th century got its hands on the concept of global-scale conflict, the 7 Years' War, from 1756 to 1763, set the stage. This wasn't just a squabble between a couple of European monarchs. It was a sprawling, globe-spanning conflict that dragged in every major European power and was fought on battlefields from North America to India, from the Caribbean islands to the plains of Central Europe. This conflict was a complex web of interlocking rivalries and ambitions. Think of it less like a single chess game and more like 5 different chess games being played simultaneously on the same board, where a move in one game could topple the pieces in another. Each nation entered this massive brawl with its own unique shopping list of desires. Some wanted land, others wanted trade routes, some wanted revenge, and a few, well, they just wanted to survive. These weren't just abstract political goals, they were the engines driving the decisions of kings, ministers and generals, decisions that would kill hundreds of thousands of people. Understanding these war aims is crucial because they didn't just shape the 7 years of fighting. They fundamentally redrew the map of the world and set in motion the forces that would lead to even bigger upheavals like the American and French revolutions. So today we're going to break down what each of the major players, Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Russia and Spain, hoped to get out of this worldwide melee. What did they want? And what were they willing to do to get it? Let's get into it. So let's start with the eventual winner, Great Britain. By the mid-18th century, Britain was an island nation with a burgeoning empire and a serious case of what we might call strategic anxiety. Their primary rival was, as it had been for centuries, France. The British looked across the English Channel and saw France that was not only a European powerhouse, but also a direct competitor for colonial dominance in North America and India. So Britain's #1 goal, printed in big, bold capital letters, was to cripple French colonial power permanently. They wanted to kick France out of North America, dismantle their trading posts in India, and basically ensure that wherever a British merchant ship sailed, it wouldn't bump into a French one. This led directly to their second major objective, absolute naval supremacy. The Royal Navy was Britain's pride, its wooden wall, and the key to its entire global strategy. To defeat France's colonial empire, Britain had to control the seas. This meant not just winning battles, but blockading French ports, strangling their trade, and preventing them from sending troops and supplies to their overseas colonies. It was a strategy of suffocation. Control the Atlantic, and you control the fate of Quebec and Martinique. Control the Indian Ocean, and you control the fate of Pondicherry. The sea was the chessboard, and Britain was determined to be the only player who could move its queen. And while all this was happening overseas, Britain had a problem closer to home, Europe. They couldn't just ignore the continent. To keep France bogged down and distracted, Britain employed its classic checkbook diplomacy. They found a continental ally who could do the dirty work of fighting the French army on land. That ally was Prussia. By bankrolling Frederick the Great's formidable army, Britain could tie up French soldiers and resources in Germany, preventing them from being deployed to the colonies. It was a brilliantly cynical and effective strategy. Pay someone else to bleed for you in Europe so you can conquer the world. It was about expanding trade, consolidating control, and ensuring that by the end of it all, the sun would never dare set on the British Empire. Now let's turn to Britain's arch-nemesis, France. If Britain's strategy was global and maritime, France's was torn between two worlds. On one hand, France was the quintessential European land power. It had the largest army, a massive population, and a long history of dominating continental politics. Its king, Louis XV, and his court were deeply invested in maintaining French prestige and power in Europe. This meant dealing with the sudden, alarming rise of Prussia. Frederick the Great's seizure of Silesia from France's ally Austria was an affront. So, a key French objective was to join the coalition with Austria and Russia to crush Prussia, dismember its territories, and put this upstart king back in his box. But France also had a sprawling, valuable overseas empire of its own, from the sugar islands of the Caribbean to the vast territories of New France in North America and trading posts in India. and this is where the internal conflict really emerges. There was a powerful faction in the French government that believed the future lay in the colonies, in global trade, and in challenging Britain's maritime dominance. Their goal was to defend and even expand these colonies. They wanted to halt British expansion in the Ohio Valley, protect their lucrative sugar trade, and break the tightening grip of the British East India Company. This required a strong navy and a focus on the global stage. The problem was France couldn't effectively do both. It was trying to be the supreme land power in Europe and a global colonial power at the same time. Every soldier and every lever spent fighting Prussia in Germany was one that couldn't be used to defend Quebec or reinforce French forces in India. Their aims were fundamentally in conflict. They wanted to restore their prestige in Europe by destroying Prussia, but they also wanted to break British naval power and hold on to their empire. This strategic schizophrenia would haunt them throughout the war as they found themselves caught between a continental war they felt they had to win and a global war they couldn't afford to lose. For Austria and its formidable ruler, Empress Maria Theresa, this war was about one thing above all others: revenge, or to put it in more diplomatic terms, the restoration of legitimate territorial integrity, but mostly revenge. 16 years earlier, in the War of the Austrian Succession, the young, cynical King of Prussia, Frederick the Great, had stolen the wealthy and populous province of Silesia from her. This was an act of brazen aggression that Maria Theresa never forgave and never forgot. For her, the 7 Years' War was simply round two. Her primary, overriding, all-consuming objective was to get Silesia back. Everything else was secondary. To achieve this, Austria needed to do more than just win a few battles. It needed to fundamentally weaken, if not outright destroy, the Kingdom of Prussia. In the eyes of the Habsburg court in Vienna, Prussia was a cancerous tumor on the body of the Holy Roman Empire, an upstart Protestant power that threatened Austria's traditional leadership role among the German states. So the goal wasn't just to reconquer a province, it was to dismantle the Prussian state, reduce it back to its core territory of Brandenburg, and end the Prussian threat once and for all. This was a war of annihilation, at least in its strategic aims. Of course, Austria knew it couldn't do this alone. Frederick's army was pound for pound probably the best in Europe. So Maria Theresa's brilliant foreign minister, Count von Kaunitz, engineered one of the most stunning diplomatic reversals in modern history, the diplomatic revolution. Austria set aside centuries of rivalry with its traditional enemy, France, and formed a grand coalition against Prussia. They brought in Russia, Sweden, and most of the smaller German states. The strategy was simple encirclement: isolate Prussia diplomatically, and then crush it with overwhelming military force from all sides, the French from the west, the Austrians from the south, and the Russians from the east. For Austria, this war was a deeply personal crusade to right a past wrong and restore the traditional order of Europe. And then there's the object of all this animosity, the small but feisty Kingdom of Prussia, led by the man they would come to call Frederick the Great. If Austria's goal was annihilation, Prussia's goal was much simpler: survival. Frederick knew exactly what he had done by taking Silesia, and he knew that Maria Theresa would never rest until she had it back. He looked at the map and saw his kingdom surrounded by three of the most powerful empires in the world: Austria, France, and Russia, all of whom had explicitly agreed to carve up his country. For Prussia, this was an existential war. Losing didn't mean losing a colony, it meant the end of Prussia as a major power. Frederick's first and most important aim was, therefore, to hold on to Silesia at all costs. It was rich in resources and population, and giving it back would be a fatal blow to Prussian prestige and power. But his strategy for survival was audacious. He knew he couldn't win a long war of attrition against such a massive coalition. His only hope was to move fast, strike hard, and try to knock his enemies out of the war one by one before they could combine their full strength against him. This led him to launch a preemptive invasion of Saxony in 1756, hoping to catch his enemies off guard and secure a quick victory. It was a massive gamble. Beyond mere survival, Frederick also aimed to cement Prussia's status as a top-tier European power. He wanted to prove that his kingdom wasn't just a fluke, that its military prowess was real, and that it deserved a seat at the table with the likes of Austria and France. He needed to break Austria's long-standing dominance within the German-speaking states of the Holy Roman Empire and establish Prussia as a rival pole of power in Central Europe. So while his immediate goal was to keep from being wiped off the map, his long-term vision was to use this war, however desperate, to solidify the gains of the last one and ensure that no one would ever underestimate Prussia again. Now we move east to the vast and powerful Russian Empire ruled by Empress Elizabeth, the daughter of Peter the Great. Russia's involvement in this war was less about old rivalries and more about new anxieties. From St. Petersburg, Empress Elizabeth and her ministers watched the meteoric rise of Prussia with growing alarm. Frederick the Great's military genius and his kingdom's aggressive expansionism were seen as a direct threat to Russia's own ambitions and security in Eastern Europe. They saw Prussia as a destabilizing force, a rogue state that needed to be contained. So Russia's primary goal was to curb Prussian power, decisively and permanently. This wasn't just about containment, though. Russia also saw an opportunity for territorial gain and increased influence. The specific prize they had their eye on was East Prussia, a non-contiguous part of Frederick's kingdom located on the Baltic coast. Conquering East Prussia would not only wound Frederick, but would also give Russia a valuable strategically located territory and further its long-term goal of dominating the Baltic Sea. For Russia, joining the coalition with Austria and France was a win-win. They could eliminate a future rival and expand their own empire in the process, all while being paid subsidies by their allies. It was a chance to flex their muscles on the European stage and demand respect as a major player. Furthermore, Empress Elizabeth had a deep personal animosity toward Frederick the Great. He had a nasty habit of making insulting public remarks about her, and she took it, well, personally. This personal dislike added a venomous edge to Russia's strategic calculations. Russian armies were ordered to push deep into Prussian territory, and they did so with brutal effectiveness, even occupying Berlin for a short time in 1760. Their goal was clear: to bleed Prussia white, seize territory, and ensure that this arrogant Prussian king would never again threaten the interests or mock the ruler of the mighty Russian Empire. Russia's participation demonstrated that the center of European power politics was no longer confined to the West. Finally, we come to the last major power to join the fray, Spain. For most of the war, Spain remained neutral, cautiously watching from the sidelines. But the Spanish Bourbon monarchy was closely tied to the French Bourbons through a series of alliances known as the Family Compact. As the war dragged on and it became clear that Britain was achieving stunning victories against France, particularly in the colonies, the Spanish government in Madrid grew increasingly nervous. They saw Britain's rampant success as a direct threat to their own vast and frankly vulnerable colonial empire in the Americas. Spain's primary goal in entering the war in 1762 was defensive. They wanted to protect their own colonies from what they saw as unchecked British ambition. If Britain could so easily seize French colonies like Quebec and Guadeloupe, what was to stop them from turning their attention to Spanish possessions like Cuba, the Philippines, or Mexico? They also hoped to support their French cousins and help restore some semblance of a balance of power in the Atlantic. A world completely dominated by the British Royal Navy was a terrifying prospect for a country that depended on treasure fleets sailing from the New World. Beyond defense, Spain had a couple of offensive goals, though they were more aspirational. The big one, a source of national humiliation for decades, was the British fortress of Gibraltar, sitting right on the southern tip of Spain. The Spanish dreamed of recapturing it. They also saw a chance to push the British out of their settlements in modern-day Belize and Honduras. So, in 1762, Spain belatedly threw its hat in the ring, signing the Third Family Compact with France and declaring war on Great Britain. It was a calculated risk to try and stem the British tide, but as we'll see, it was a risk that would backfire spectacularly. So after 7 years of brutal fighting across 5 continents, what was the final scorecard? When the treaties were signed in 1763, the world looked profoundly different. The biggest winner, without a doubt, was Great Britain. It had achieved nearly all of its war aims. It stood as the world's undisputed, dominant global power, its navy supreme on the seas. France was the biggest loser, stripped of most of its empire. New France was gone, handed over to Britain, and its influence in India was shattered, leaving Britain to consolidate its control over the subcontinent. The dream of a French global empire was, for now, over. In Europe, the outcome was more of a stalemate, but one with a clear winner in prestige. Prussia, against all odds, survived. Frederick the Great, through a combination of military genius, sheer grit, and a massive dose of luck, the miracle of the House of Brandenburg when Empress Elizabeth of Russia died, managed to hold on to Silesia. Austria, despite its grand coalition, failed in its primary objective of reclaiming the province and crushing its rival. Prussia emerged from the war battered, but with its reputation enhanced, now firmly established as a major European power, and Austria's equal in the German states. The other powers saw mixed results that would shape their futures. Russia, despite pulling out of the war early, had successfully projected its power deep into Europe, gaining prestige and setting the stage for its future expansion, particularly against Poland. Spain, for its late entry, paid a price, losing Florida to the British. However, as compensation, France handed over its vast Louisiana territory west of the Mississippi to Spain, a consolation prize that reshaped the map of North America. The 7 Years' War didn't just end, it created a new world order and planted the seeds for the revolutions that would define the next half-century.